everybody, it's Franny and welcome to Heidi and Franny's Garage. If this is your first time to the channel, please consider subscribing. Hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell next to it so you'll be notified. So today what I want to do is I want to continue our little series on how to work on your car with an episode on diagnostics. So this is the 996 has this perfect little thing going on with it right now. So you heard that little squeaky bit in the beginning, right? Well, that's been happening on and off a little bit with the car, so I really want to get to it and figure out what it is. So the next step when you've kind of determined that you've got something going on with your car is to try to box it in. Try to figure out what circumstances make that problem actually present itself. And that's really important because even if you find out later that it's totally something I don't want to do myself, that's okay because you can take that to the mechanic as well. And filming it is a great option. So getting out your phone and then filming that one little bit, that gives you a lot of information, even if you decide to not work on the car yourself. Okay, so in this particular case, we would drive very slowly over uneven pavement and it would start to squeak. At high speeds, it wouldn't do it. And it didn't matter what the engine was doing and it didn't matter what the brakes were doing. So those are all kind of important bits. Great, so armed with all that information, I then went to the internet and went on the forums and tried to find if I could get something, some posts and things in there and a few different threads that seemed to line up with the conditions I'm seeing. And I did. So it turns out that for the 996s, it's not super common, but it happens often enough that these lower links on the bottom and the front wheels, they have a big ball joint in them that's sitting inside like a nylon spacer in there, and if it gets dry, it'll start to squeak. And I thought, that sounds a lot like it. So if it's moving really fast, it's not going to squeak. So if you're traveling at a good speed, only at sort of slow speeds will you hear it. I thought, that's very interesting. Okay, so now that I've got some type of consensus from all that work, and it took hours on the internet to kind of figure that out, but now that I have a consensus, I have an idea of at least what part to look at. So the next step's going to be to get underneath the car, familiarize myself with those bits under there, and see if we can see anything that might point us in that same direction. So let's get underneath the car and see what we see. Here under the car, we can start to get familiar with some of the parts underneath here. Now, when you're looking on the internet, a lot of times it's hard to get an idea. There's like no frame of reference. What am I looking at? So these are the parts in question. This is that lower link here, and it's pinned back here. And there's also another beam here, sort of a leading link to keep this part from moving forward and backward. And then there's our ball link that's up here. So that's the part that we think is probably bad. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at that and see if we can find anything wrong with it. Well, this is our ball link. It starts up here, goes through this carrier and into this arm, and the actual ball link actually sits inside this bottom part here. So just sort of looking around, we can notice right away that this part is pretty ripped. And that just can't be like that. What that's going to mean is that this thing has lost its lubrication, and since it's lost its lubrication, it's going to start to squeak. So I think we have completely nailed our problem here. This part has to be replaced because of that. Now let's say you had gotten to this point and you didn't have a rip in your boot and it's still making that noise, and you're pretty certain it's this piece right here. Then one other thing you could possibly do is to try and get some lubricant into this rubber boot here. And one way to do that is with like sort of like a needle with some grease, and if you can stick it through there and get some grease in there, grease this part up and then go out and retest again. Does it make noise? Does it squeak? And if it doesn't squeak anymore, then you've found your issue. If it still squeaks and you put grease in it, then you're probably looking somewhere else. Once you've determined that it's something that you might want to do yourself, go back to the blogs and go back to possibly YouTube and look for some videos and get a little more information. Now that you've been under here and you've got your bearings, you can focus in on this exact problem. But that, and I make YouTube videos on a lot of this repair stuff, and I say take them with a grain of salt. Really what you want to look at after you've seen those is to go to the actual service manuals for the car and read the section on how to replace this part. So I do have a service manual for this car, and it's a little thin actually on some of the information on how to do this. I think they probably think it's fairly straightforward, so a mechanic shouldn't have too much trouble with it. But I did check that out. That's something you always want to check out. I got the torque specs for all 3 of these bolts. That's another thing you'll need. So all right, so now I think I'm all set. I think I'm ready to go. This part here was the next step, was determining, well, where am I going to get this part and how much is it going to cost? So I did some searching for it, and there's an OEM part you can get that's about $450, and that's kind of expensive. But if you think about it, I mean, it's got rubber bushings here, it's got your ball joint up there, and another rubber bushing here. Maybe it's not too super duper expensive, but I still was hoping not to spend quite that much. So I looked around at some aftermarket parts to see if they could be contenders as well. And turns out there's a good German OEM manufacturer for this part that builds a beautiful piece of this thing, and it looks identical to the original Porsche part. So that's a great option in this case. Sometimes I go with the OEM part, and sometimes I'll go with the aftermarket part. In this case, the aftermarket part's only like $100. So that's a big cost savings. So at this point, I've ordered the part that I need. I wanted to at least inspect it. And if it wasn't up to snuff and I didn't think it was a very good part, I'd just go ahead and send it back completely in the original packaging and everything. But the new part looks great. So I think I'm all set here to continue on. I'm going to put together a full video on how to replace this bit here. But as far as the diagnostic process goes, that's pretty much it. We've made our decision. We've got our part. We have a huge amount of information. We've checked the service manual. We know all of our torque specs. We're all set to go. And if at this point you're still like, oh, there's zero chance I'm doing this, I'm going to take it to the dealership, great. You've got tons of information to do it. And that's great. So either way, it's a win-win. If you can present this information to the mechanic, you can save that mechanic quite a bit of time, and that can save you money. So, all right, so that's it. That's pretty much the end of the diagnostic work on this. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. Questions or comments, leave them down below, and I'll get right to them. So thanks so much, and until next time, safe travels. Bye.